Story that we have been following all throughout the morning. Take a look right here on your screen. This is actually from just about an hour ago here, as the World Court will not throw out genocide charges against Israel for its military offensive in Gaza, but also is not going to order a ceasefire. Announcing their decision on the eve of International Holocaust Remembrance Day, the International Court of Justice did demand that Israel try to contain death and damage in its military offensive. That decision comes after South Africa asked the court to order Israel to halt its operation, claiming genocide. I do want to talk more about this and the latest developments on the war. So let's bring in Enya Kravin, the Senior Director of the Israel Program and National Security Network at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies here. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us on this Friday morning. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, Josh.
Of course. Well, first off, I just want to get your thoughts and your analysis here on this decision there by the ICJ.
Yeah, we were all anticipating this ruling. It came out at 7 a.m. this morning. And it was a mixed bag, in truth. I mean, the true tragedy here is that this case is even happening. South Africa brought these ridiculous claims to the court, demanding a ceasefire, trying to intervene in Israel's self-defense with horrible claims of genocide, which are inherently false. And as the ruling today stopped short of how bad it could have been. It stopped short of intervening and demanding a ceasefire, but it did leave clues that this is going to be an ongoing case against Israel, and we have not seen the last of it.
And the World Court essentially saying there that they need to control damage and deaths there over in Gaza, talking, of course, about Israel. Isn't that kind of what's already been going on from our understanding?
100%. Israel uses a similar targeting practice that the U.S. does. It is trying desperately to mitigate civilian casualties. It's tough when you're fighting a terrorist enemy that is deeply embedded in the civilian population, in schools, in UN facilities, in hospitals, in mosques. So Israel is doing its best. Other countries have come out and said as much. The first phase of the war had its tactic of trying to remove civilians from the northern part, and now all the civilians are crowded into the southern region of Gaza in an extremely densely populated now civilian area, and the IDF has changed its face into more of a soldier-led, on-the-ground urban combat warfare. And unfortunately, there are casualties. War is a horrible thing. That's why Western democracies and just countries try to avoid them at all costs. But yes, Israel, to your point, Israel is taking huge steps to try and minimize civilian casualties.
And I do want to talk about the war overall here. Can you kind of explain to me where things stand at this moment when you talk about the war that is now in its 4th month?
That's correct. The war is in its 4th month, and the ground invasion is into its 3rd month now. We're about 100 days in. Israel has largely secured northern Gaza and central Gaza, which were a rather large area a rather large goal to achieve in the first 100 days. And now all the big questions remain on southern Gaza. There are 2 major Hamas strongholds in southern Gaza. One is a town called Khan Yunis, and one is Rafah. And IDF is now eyeing how to approach those towns, given the dense population and movement of civilians that has gone into those areas, making it quite complicated. But here's the interesting thing. The IDF believes that they are now above the tunnels where over 130 Israeli hostages are being held, including civilians, including children, women. And so the IDF are operating knowing that 6 stories below them, approximately, are these people that they've come in to rescue. But it gets tough because the Hamas leadership are believed to be hiding among the hostages. So now the IDF is faced with this conundrum of how to bring those hostages home alive and still defeat Hamas, who are using the hostages as human shields and an insurance policy.
We've heard a lot over the past couple months or so about yet another deal that is in the works. And I believe it was just days ago that word started to circulate that Hamas had essentially denied a deal that was put forward by Israel that would have led to the release of the rest of the hostages and a 2-month pause in the fighting there. Where do things stand as far as another possible deal to release the rest of the hostages?
As far as I can understand, the negotiations have been constant. We have a situation now where Bill Burns and, excuse me, Israeli Mossad director David Barnea are now going for another round of intense negotiations. And the Israeli society is deeply divided on whether it makes sense to exchange the lives of Israeli hostages for Palestinian prisoners. It has this negotiation between freeing hostages in exchange for prisoners, some with blood on their hands, is a really tough issue in Israeli society, and Israel is somewhat divided on it. But here's where Israel is united. Israel wants to see the end of Hamas. Israel is no longer prepared to live next to a genocidal terror regime who openly calls for the destruction and the murder of Israelis. So although there is some debate about how and when and how it should be put into action, there is absolutely no doubt that there remains unity in Israel among the demand for Hamas to be gone from Gaza.
And I do want to read a quote that actually came here from the finance minister for Israel as he accused Qatar of impeding those hostage talks and described Qatar as, quote, the biggest obstacle for returning the hostages. Why might that be the case?
So Qatar has really inserted itself as the arsonist playing firefighter in this negotiation. Qatar is Hamas's greatest patron, Qatar and Iran. They are sympathetic and have a similar leadership to the Muslim Brotherhood ideology that Hamas espouses. Qatar has always been a difficult player for the Israelis to negotiate with, but the Israelis have been forced into the corner of Qatar being their only option. And this has been reinforced by our administration in the US. And if you can imagine this position of the families of these hostages, over 130 hostages who've been held for over 100 days with no signs of life. We know that about 30 of them have been killed in captivity. And this is their lifeline. As far as they can see, Qatar is their only way to bring their loved ones home. And yet we know Qatar is rooting for the survival of the Hamas regime because they've invested so much and because they are so ideologically compatible with Hamas. So it's a tough situation. There's no easy answers, and you know, I think that Israel is getting frustrated with the Qatari channel. I think that the leaks and the statements out of the Israeli government demonstrate that. But I also think that we might be at a place where Hamas are in a corner, and they are, you know, we know that they're using the Israeli hostages as a human shield. And Hamas may also feel like they're backed into the corner, and this might be their last gasp for a deal that allows them to come out of this standing.
We've also seen the families of those hostages. We've had them on here a lot over the past several months. We've seen them now camping outside of Netanyahu's home. They've also interrupted a meeting of the Knesset. Does this have any sort of impact on a deal itself and what the government is doing, or is it just something else that is happening? We've heard a lot of people say they understand how these families have to be feeling at this point. Does this have any sort of effect on the negotiations?
I believe it does have an effect. Israel is a democracy. It's a tiny country. It's the size of New Jersey, population of 9 million. There's very few people who are not personally affected or do not know someone who knows someone who has been affected by this war. And so having those families camping out, putting pressure on the government, Israel is a fierce and fiery democracy. I'm sure the same would be happening at home if we were put in this awful and unenviable position. So yes, I think the short answer is it does have an impact. But again, the impact and the messages that these families of the hostages are saying is not whether Hamas should be destroyed or whether Israel can go back to the conditions before October 7th. The question is really the tactics of bringing the hostages home. Like I said earlier, there is a very strong feeling of unity in Israel about the need to destroy Hamas and rid Gaza of Hamas for once and for all.
And my last question here before I let you go, I do want to get kind of your take on this. This is a social media post that has been essentially all over Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Take a look at your screen right there. And this is actually coming from the Arab News. And that is a photo there. Images circulating, as I mentioned, a restaurant that opened over in Jordan, and it's called October 7th, referencing the day of the attack by Hamas that led to this war. Does that say anything about the relationship of Israel and all of its neighbors there in the Middle East?
Yeah, so I don't know whether in fact that's true. I haven't been to Jordan or Amman to verify myself, but I can tell you that it does speak volumes, just the fact of how quickly it's traveled throughout social media. Of how many people have looked at it with glee, how many Hamas sympathizers. The Middle East is a tough neighborhood, and there's not a lot of warm fuzzies between Israel and its Arab neighbors, unfortunately. And another sort of thing, the elephant in the room here, is that Jordan, the majority of Jordanians today are of Palestinian descent. It is essentially a majority Palestinian country. So it doesn't surprise me that the folks on the street are sympathizing or taking pride in the massacres and atrocities of October 7th, unfortunately. But I will say this. Jordan had once enjoyed one of the warmest peaces with Israel. I mean, there is, to this day, there is strong security cooperation at the top. In many ways, the Jordanian regime relies upon U.S. support and security cooperation with Israel for its survival. But unfortunately, in the last 10 and 20 years, the relations between Israel and Jordan have taken a downturn. And today, it is no longer one of the warmest peaces that Israel enjoys with its Arab neighbors. It's one of the coldest. And as much as I'm appalled by the idea that there would be a restaurant named in honor of October 7th, I can tell you with some certainty that that restaurant would not be put up in one of the Abraham Accord countries, where the leadership are making a concerted effort to build ties with Israel. They see it's in their benefit. They understand that all of the Arab countries in the West and Israel are facing the same terrorist threat, spearheaded by the Iranian regime, a regime that wants to gobble up the Middle East with its Islamist ideology. And so unfortunately, it's very sad and discouraging for me to see this out of Jordan, but I can say that I don't think you would have seen it out of an Abraham country, and I hope that that Jordan can turn the ship around a little bit.
All right. Anya, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here and help break down some of the latest headlines, including that breaking news there. Is there anything else you want to add before I let you go?
No, thank you so much, Josh. I think we've covered it. I appreciate your time, and I look forward to doing this again.
Of course. Thank you again, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.